Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So tonight, I'm going to get into an article that I think I mentioned that I wanted to get to it maybe a week or two ago. I can't remember exactly. I'm just now getting to it now, and there's actually going to be another piece coming up that discusses really the same topic. It's just more of what I've said before. And as I've said, when you're dealing with race questions in Brazil, it always comes down to a situation where people want to point the finger. People don't want to consider what you're saying because maybe it goes against what they believe. In the comment section on this channel, I get a lot of people who, how can I say, they find what I'm saying to be true. There's a lot of people who have visited Brazil. They've come to the same conclusions that I have. And I know this is obviously, a lot of the people who agree with what I'm saying are also going to be Americans, but I always want to point out that, well, what happens when you find Brazilians who are coming to the same conclusions as Americans are? People can sit down and analyze a situation and come to their own conclusions, and people either agree or they disagree. It was intriguing. Somebody posted a comment on the blog, I think either today or yesterday, and then they were talking about, now this comment didn't really mention where the person said that they moved to Brazil recently, and he said that he and his wife, he noticed this. I don't know what city he was living in. It may be Sao Paulo, maybe another city, but he said how he noticed that wherever he went, he noticed. He said that he earns a pretty decent amount of money because he works in tech, he said. And he said the areas that he and his wife frequent, he always sees either white couples or mixed race couples. It's like oftentimes they go to places and just he and his wife are the only black couple in the whole spot. And this is something that I saw for years. So it's like, okay, how do you interpret that? People get offended. Why are you politicizing, interracial couples or whatever? That's really not the point here. The question is looking at a phenomenon and questioning, okay, well, why is it like this? It's not to say this is a good or bad thing. The first question is, okay, well, why is it that it happens this way? I don't know why there's a problem with analyzing that. It's almost like, the times that I discussed this question with Black Brazilians, particularly, including those who are involved in interracial relationships. And, it's a question that's going to come up. And oftentimes people, they get very defensive. They don't want to hear it. They disagree. And, I can remember some years ago, I'm not going to deny the fact that I had dated interracially. And, I can remember all of the comments that people made. Some people would just make, really horrific comments. People would make snide comments. But every now and then somebody would make a thought-provoking comment. That's something that just made me sit and think. If nobody ever says anything that goes outside of your realm of thought, then how do you expand how you think? So anyway, I want to get right into the material. I could talk, I've obviously done a number of videos on this topic, but when this topic came up, it's probably been about a month or so, month and a half, maybe, that this news came out about this popular Black couple in Brazil. And a lot of people were commenting on it. So as it went hand in hand with some of the material that I was already, presenting on the channel, I says, I definitely want to address this issue because a lot of people are talking about it. Plus, it fits along, it fits well with what I'm already talking about here on the YouTube channel. So today's piece is called Black Love. Why is the relationship commitment less with our own and greater with white partners? So I want to get directly into this article today. I'm curious to know what people will think about it. So let's just get straight into it. Okay, so tonight I wanted to address a topic that I mentioned I would cover either last week or the week before that. I mentioned this in a previous video about how one author was of the opinion that Black Brazilians seek a certain type of validation from white people, which in turn has its effects on and makes relationships between Black Brazilian men and women more complex. It's a deep topic and needs to be discussed. I have to be honest. Even as I have read, or as I had read a lot of material about Black Brazil as I began to visit the country back in the year 2000, reading books and academic material sometimes didn't address issues head on. Yes, these books did explain that Brazil had a centuries-long process of miscegenation and mixing between the three principal race groups in the country, which are the white Portuguese, Black Africans, and Brazil's native Indian population. There's plenty of that. You know, in many of the books that came out of the 50s and 60s, you know, authors presented this as a thing of Brazil's strength is the mixing of the races. But it's been in recent years that people are starting to question that interpretation. So upon my first contact with the country and its people and seeing the widespread admixture that was evident in the various facial features, skin tones, and hair textures within the Brazilian population, my first reaction was optimistic. Although there was a history of racial mixture in the United States that many Brazilians didn't seem to understand, it was nowhere near what I saw in Brazil. Looking at the fruits of centuries of amalgamation, my first thoughts were, well, maybe this is a good thing. I also thought maybe if racial amalgamation was more accepted in the US, maybe we wouldn't have such racial antagonisms. Now, just to point out, I can't remember if it was in the 60s or in the 70s, but Ebony magazine, you know, the popular magazine targeted at the Black American population, they actually featured, I think her name was Vera Couto. She was elected Miss, what was it? Miss Guarabara, I think it was called. And this was in the 1960s, you know, in present day Rio de Janeiro state. And she was what they would call a mulatta, but she was chosen to represent Brazil in the, you know, Miss World competition. She was placed on the cover of a particular Ebony magazine. I have it saved somewhere. And the question on the cover was something like, does amalgamation work in Brazil? And they went through that whole question. So it's something that's always presented as this is a positive thing. It shows that, you know, this is less racist in the country. But then when you delve into Brazil and study how people think about the topic of race, you find all of these really terrible stereotypes about the Black population, people having the ideal that you need to mix the Black look out of the family. It's just all of this stuff. And it's like, just because there's interracial mixture, again, it doesn't prove a lack of racism. It proves, in Brazil's case, that it does not value its Black population. It would rather see its Black population disappear. So I'm saying these were my first thoughts, thinking, well, maybe this is a good thing, you know. But then as I really started to dig into Brazil's history, I came to some other conclusions. These were my first thoughts upon, you know, visiting the country. But then as I continued to visit and do more research, something changed in my perception. So this is a photo that I'm going to keep showing. It's so synonymous with 19th century elites and their desire that the country whiten. So this is I've seen this picture. People have used it in numerous YouTube videos. I discovered this painting, I don't know, sometime in the first, 5 years of visiting the country. And again, for those who don't know, it's called the Rejeição de Cam, which is translated as Ham's Redemption. So I think this first change was coming across the painting known as the Rejeição de Cam, meaning Ham's Redemption. The title of this painting was influenced by an interpretation of a passage in the book of Genesis in the Bible, in which it was widely believed that Ham and his descendants were believed to be cursed because one of his sons saw a naked Noah in the darkness of night. In Portuguese, the name Ham actually becomes Cam or Ca, if I'm not mistaken, like C-A, and it has the little symbol on top of the A. And thus, as the painting depicts a progressive whitening of a dark-skinned Black woman's family, The family, assumed to be a descendants of Ham, are said to have redeemed itself by becoming white within 3 generations. When I saw this painting, its meaning and the representation of a white of Brazil, I began to see widespread amalgamation as something a little bit more sinister than it first appeared. I've said this hundreds of times. It is true that people can and in fact do fall in love across racial lines, but on the other hand, what would be the effect of the promotion of such unions in which darker people were taught to whiten their descendants by specifically pursuing white or whiter skinned romantic partners? Well, to me, that's something quite different. When I look at how whole families become white, I'm saying darker skinned families, the whole family becomes white after, decades or whatever. They become either completely white, near white, Brazilian white. And this Brazilian white is something that I've heard Brazilians say from time to time because they know that the typical white Brazilian probably wouldn't be white in, say, United States or in Western Europe. So they know, and they define this type of white person as Brazilian white because only in Brazil or in Latin America would this person be considered white. And it strikes me that the brown and black skinned people that still exist in Brazil are those families who have simply not, I wouldn't say begun the process of whitening. They just haven't reached that stage where the family is considered white, or, the majority of people in their family is considered white. I don't want to mistake or misspeak, because we know that black and brown families on both sides have, mixture in their families. It's just that they haven't completed the process. This has been going on for decades. This is not to suggest that all black families desire this processo de embranquecimento, meaning the whitening process. But to ignore its existence in the minds of millions of people would simply be disingenuous. The proof of this is hundreds or perhaps tens of thousands of black and brown Brazilians who have come to realize that this preference for white skin and white romantic partners was initiated in their very own families, I'll say. So before anyone comes here pointing a finger at me, making the accusation that this is the perspective of the racist American, there are perhaps hundreds of texts online, in blogs, social networks, and videos in which Brazilians themselves acknowledge this. The stories told to me by various teenagers and young adult Brazilians also confirm this as proof. So then what does this all have to do with today's video? Okay, this woman, this is who I'm going to be talking a little bit about today. This is Evie Pisotti. It has to do with the news of the end of a marriage between two relatively well-known Black Brazilians. One, again, this is dancer Evie Pisotti, a woman I became familiar with from the popular Sunday afternoon global television variety show Domingão do Faustão. So this is Evie with, everybody knows Faustão. If you spend any time in Brazil, you're familiar with that television show that used to come on every Sunday on Global. I don't know where I think he switched television networks a few years back, if I'm not mistaken. At the time, the Faustão program had very few Black women dancers featured on the program. I mean, I remember when I was watching that show, and I used to watch it even when I had Global International when I lived in Detroit. And I remember just seeing like one Black woman out of like 20 to 25 of these dancers. They started changing that, some years later. But my first impression was like, well, where are the Black dancers? Faustão's dancing girls were clearly placed there for eye candy, a group of maybe 15 to 20 women, maybe more, who choreographed steps, would take the show to commercial breaks, bring it back from commercials, and back up the singers who performed on the program. So this is another picture of Faustão surrounded by all of his dancers, right? Some of these women went on to become, pretty famous in their own right, having their own, fan sections and followers on social networks. But as I'm saying, when I first started watching the show, you only saw like one Black girl in this whole group. Although I never considered myself a fan of the program, in the family settings in which I lived in Sao Paulo over the years, Sundays often had the same routine. Interacting with a family that I met with regularly included lunch, conversations, and television, which in turn included lots of soccer on television, or futebol as Brazilians call it, which was often followed up by the Faustão program. Another picture of some of the dancing girls. Some years ago, I posted an article asking why there were so few Black dancers on the program. Faustão's dancing girls were a memorable part of the show and held a status equal to, I don't know, maybe the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. There's a number of television variety shows on several networks throughout Brazil, on Brazil's media. And this same ratio you would see on other television programs where it was just like you have a bunch of dancing girls or, the sexy girls that are featured on the program as eye candy, whatever. And you would always see those either white or Latina looking Brazilian women, and just like either no black women or just one or two here and there. And there's an article I did about that. Anyway, after several years, I noticed that the program had begun to include more black dancers than ever before. I remember many of these black Brazilian women came together for a photo shoot celebrating the November 20th Day of Black Consciousness in Brazil. I don't remember what year this picture is. I don't know, 2019 or 20, somewhere in there. The title of the article that I posted at that time was called Black, Brown, and Beige Beauty. In a special photo shoot, 10 gorgeous black women of popular global TV variety show discuss blackness, representation, and struggle. Evie was one of the black girls that got famous through Faustão as part of the female dance group, as well as her participation in the segment of the Faustão show called Dança dos Famosos, which means, it was just, famous people, competing in these dance contests in a segment of the show that was inspired by the Dancing with the Stars program. This is Evie with, one of the guests, one of the special dancers, probably one of the celebrities that appeared in that segment. So Pizzotti also became one of a handful of black Brazilian women featured on the cover of the Brazilian edition of Playboy magazine. I think Playboy's Brazil edition folded some years ago. And if you ever saw some of the girly magazines in Brazil, you would understand why, because it's like to compete in the Brazilian market, you have to be, hypersexualized. It has to leave very little to the imagination. And the Playboy magazine was just a little bit too tame compared to some of the other girly magazines that you find on the magazine stands in Brazil. Evie's husband, Luis Navajo, is a B-list actor who has appeared in a number of television series, novellas, and films. So this is her husband, or we can say her ex-husband. I know they separated. I don't know if they've actually divorced at this point, but, this news hit Brazil's black media like a month and a half ago, and they were all like, wow, this couple just broke up. When the two of them got married in December of 2021, I remember seeing comments on social networks celebrating amor preto and amor afrocentrado, which mean black love and Afrocentric love, respectively. Another picture of the couple's wedding. To understand why people were celebrating this in, Black Brazil social media, you must remember that Black Brazilians don't really have many famous couples represented by a Black man and a Black woman. I've spoken about this in another video and other articles where with this call for Black love in Brazil, they want to promote the idea of Black men and Black women getting together. And one of the only couples they can consistently show is like Thais Araújo and her husband, Lázaro Ramos. If they want to show more Black couples, then they have to start posting photos of famous American Black couples, because there's just not enough Black Brazilian couples featuring, Black man and a Black woman. There are a few, there's a handful, but it's just not many that they can look to promote this idea that, Black men and Black women need to get together. They always have to turn to the American side. Anyway, I've said it many times in other posts and videos, even though famous Black Brazilian men are often accused of palmitagem or preferring white women for long-term relationships, when you look at famous Black Brazilian women, they are nearly as likely to marry across racial lines. And it would be foolish to believe that all of them do so because Black men just don't give them any attention. What I want to discuss today brings to the fore an issue I've noted for a number of years. Although Brazil has long presented itself as a country without the deep-seated racial issues so common in the United States, and presenting high rates of interracial unions as quote-unquote proof of this, I have long suspected that there is much more going on here than just love across color lines. And Black Brazilians themselves have begun to question this narrative. Increasingly, Black Brazilians have been raising the question of why so many of them seem to date and marry white Brazilians. And deep down, do they seem to have a preference for white partners? That's the question. Afro-Brazilians have increasingly acknowledged that they need to recognize their palmitagem, and one of the reasons for such preferences. This is a couple taken from the Love is Blind Brazil edition, the reality show. They translated it as Casamento às Cegas, which basically means like, I don't know, blind marriage, blind wedding. And these are two participants in the reality show. And so I talked about this briefly in one of my previous videos. The point here being, a lot of Black parents come to the idea that you need to bring home a white man or white woman. In Brazil, do Black parents influence their children to choose white spouses? That's another article, another video you should check out that came out before this video I'm doing now. One being the influence of parents, society, and the media, and second, the pursuit of and the need for white validation. Both of these last few points refer to the fact that in many cases, Black Brazilians may have a deep-seated, possibly subconscious need for the people who have been long considered the standard in Brazilian society. Whiteness in Brazil for centuries has been considered the epitome of beauty, intelligence, wealth, and so many other positive attributes. For these reasons, many Black and brown Brazilians have long carried the belief that to have some sort of self-value, they must have a white partner at their side. Let us remember, or just let me point out, the memories of one Black woman who remembered being told by a Black man she was dating that he needed to have someone white at his side and not someone Black like himself. If this applies to this couple, the question is, how many of the Black partners in, interracial unions in Brazil think the same way? I can't, there's no way I could estimate, and there's no way I could even begin to come to a conclusion on that question. But again, it's something that you can't dismiss. This viewpoint is clearly not an isolated incident. After observing this for a number of years, I've often wondered how many people in marriages in which both partners are Black what I'm saying is I wonder, even when the couples are Black, if one of the Black partners or both actually might still have a desire for a white partner, even being married to a Black partner. People believing that, well, if they're married, then how can they have, how can they desire another partner that, a white partner? Well, oftentimes when people get married, they end up marrying the person who, because they didn't end up, connecting with the person who they wanted at first choice. How many couples are constructed in this way, I have no idea. But just the fact that you have interracial unions does not mean it's a lack of racism or racism doesn't exist. And the fact that you have Black couples does not mean that neither one of the partners in that Black couple has a desire for a white partner. And we see oftentimes that I hear family after family who tell me how the Black father and the Black mother were together for a number of years. They divorced. He remarried a white woman. It's something that is pretty common in Brazil. Well, I'm not the only one to wonder what else is at play here. With the announcement of the separation of Evie, I don't know if it's Evie or Evie, Pizzotti and Luis Navajo, a Black psychologist shared her thoughts on a certain frame of mind that she has noted in Black Brazilian couples. So let's get to it. So this is Luis and Evie. They recently announced that they separated. There was a lot of chatter online about this because he decided to, step away from, his wife had just had another baby. So they have 2 children now, and people were, calling him out. Like, how could you leave your wife with not only just, I think their child is probably somewhere between, the first baby is like 2 to 4 years old, a toddler by now, but she just recently had another baby. And it was like, at this point, he stepped away from the marriage. So people were calling him out for that. Let me get into this article. So the question, Black love. Why is the commitment less with our own and greater with our figures of oppression? This is a piece by Shania Carlson. She's a Black psychologist. Not sure if she lives in Sao Paulo. I didn't actually look into that, but this is her perspective. Dear readers, I'm in the habit of writing only from my clinical practice as a Black psychologist, therapist of Black and interracial couples, and mental health activist. I think that the entire theoretical framework guides us in our discussions. However, I think that the experience is sovereign. This article is about the difficulty that Black couples face in sustaining the slogan Amor Negro Cura, which means Black love heals, in practice. The real challenges of Afrocentric relationships and how our affections are still polluted with coloniality. I have noticed in my appointments with a great deal of frequency the intolerance and demand of Black people for their Black partners and a condescension when the partners are white. In their reports, I noticed that the ruptures occur more easily, less guilt, as if the relationship is naturally doomed to failure, as if there is no novelty, like, oh, I already knew. I notice a lower effective investment with lower expectations. On the other hand, I also listen carefully to many Black people in extremely dubious, abusive, unhappy relationships, and sometimes in even despicable situations, and yet a huge effort to maintain the relationship with their white partners, even if it costs them their mental and emotional health. Hence, I invite you to reflect. Why is the commitment less with our own and greater with our figures of oppression? These days, the news of the separation of a relatively famous Black couple has caught our attention and was a source of criticism mainly about the attitude of the actor Luis Navajo, who apparently decided to end a former relationship with his wife, Evie Pizzotti, even though she is in her postpartum period, a period considered one of the most fragile that a woman can experience. Two fragments of sentences were emblematic in my opinion, and I will talk about them. He said, being a father, husband, artist, and being one of the foundations of a Black family is not for a few. My spirit has succumbed, weakened. It's an interesting phrase because if we think that historically men have been forged by machismo, regardless of being Black or white, and consequently are self-centered and tend to prioritize their individual needs, we aren't surprised by such an attitude. Another aspect is that being a father, husband, having a profession, and having both practical and symbolic responsibilities is part of being a man participating in adult life. But what is it really that's behind this feeling of weakness, my Black brother? Our history is one of disagreements. I've talked about it in other articles. Author Angela Davis points out the cursed legacies of the colonial system and the destruction of the Black family, while Neuza Souza highlights the difficulty of building ourselves as Black subjects in a full way, while Bell Hooks teaches us the exercise of self-love and loving kindness as a fundamental factor of our survival. The author Isilgenia Batista makes us reflect on the burden of the perverse signs that we are obliged to carry in our bodies and inscribed in our psyche. And Frantz Fanon, through his emblematic phrase, the Black man is not a man, but a Black man, leaves a direct message to those who understand well to understand. They all majestically address the question of Black people, both in the social and psychological spheres, and how costly our interactions and relationships are. We know that Black men, due to the processes of colonization and enslavement, were not in any way free to exercise their roles as heads of families, and the consequences we see in the official indices. Depending on the experience of each Black man, this logic can be introjected, thus causing a sense of powerlessness, of not being able to assume a social place reserved for white men, that of head of the family. Now, when she talks about official indices or indexes, she's talking about the statistics that show that Black men, their inequality in comparison to white men, the lower levels of education, the more likelihood of leaving school early, the more likelihood of being killed in the streets, the more likelihood of being, spending a significant part of their lives in jail. It is with great, great pain and out of respect for all of you who have cheered for our family that I come to communicate that Louis and I are no longer together. It was a hard choice, and it was hard and I had no choice. This is what Evie Pizzotti said about the breakup. On the other hand, this phrase is the reality of the Black woman, because what choice would she have in such a situation, right? When the Black man interjects the idea of his impotence, he doesn't see himself responsible for humanizing the Black woman. He expects what society expects, that she endure anything, thus corroborating the social animalization to which Black women are often subjected. In addition, the Black woman, as before, was not seen as an object of desire and body deserving of affection, ends up suffering retaliation even when chosen to be in a formal relationship. The question of millions is, if it were a white wife, would she be subjected to this situation? How many Black men abandoned their white wives in the weeks after they had a baby? This text aims to demonstrate how it is possible to repeat the violence that racism reproduces or produces in Afrocentric relationships, and that the discourse Amor Preto Cura, again meaning Black love heals, is a continuous effort and an exercise of concentrated attention. All caution is little. The decolonization of affections is an important way for us to ensure minimally healthy relationships without the pollution caused by the white ego ideal imposed upon us. Humanize deeply without superficiality. This discussion is not only to blame Black men, because Black women also face the same problems. It is a collective issue of our community, of effective responsibility, and of preserving our survival as a group. There is an urgent need to look at our contradictions and, if possible, to be aware of the pitfalls that racism preaches to us. So let us decolonize the affections. One thing I want to point out, I don't agree with totally everything that she said here. There's a few parts that are up for debate, I would say. But there have been a number of people who have also opined that the question of this loneliness, what's been called the solidão da mulher negra, the loneliness of Black women, the difficulty of finding and attaining long-term relationships, is something that affects Black people as a whole in Brazil. It's not just Black women; it's Black women, it's Black men. They talk about how Black men participate, who are in the LGBT community, often go through these same problems. So it's as a community, as a people, that these problems have to be addressed, because Black men and Black women have come up in a society where they were belittled and dehumanized, and socially engineered and manipulated into accepting this idea of white superiority, to the point that, well, being with another Black person just does not validate their existence in the minds of many. So again, there's this whole thing of pointing fingers between Black men and Black women that we see going on in Brazil is not going to solve the issue. It's going to continue until there's people who are willing to go deeper inside their own emotions and their psyches, and to discover if you have this embedded idea that you need whiteness in order to feel like a full human. You need whiteness to feel like you've made it, or you're successful in your life, or something like that. And this is not to say that I have any idea of how many people feel this way, because I think it's something that could be something that's totally subconscious. In other ways, I think it's pretty obvious, because again, as a previous video, another guy was pointing out, and it's something that I've said also, that what is the influence of Black parents, Black grandparents, of people choosing white partners? It's not for me to be able to look at any couple and say, well, you chose this person because you have a deep-seated, devaluation of Blackness. It's not for me to look at every couple, interracial couple, and say that, because I feel like only the person who is involved in that, that relationship, only with a deep, we can say a deep dive into their own soul and their psyche, can they come to this conclusion and define whether they've been victimized by this social engineering that's been promoted in Brazil for, one could argue, a century and a half. Some can argue, since slavery started in Brazil. But I'm glad that there's more people who's talking about this. As I said, when I first started talking about this, when I discovered this, I don't know, about 15, 16, 17 years ago, I was just painted as a racist American. You guys don't mix in the United States like we do in Brazil. But the point is, what's going on in Brazil, there's something much more, something much deeper going on than just love has no color. And that's something that needs to be addressed. So I'm curious to know what you all thought about this particular video, some of the conclusions that the author made. And definitely drop a comment and just let me know what you thought about this article. There's more where this came from, because, I've said in previous posts on the blog that I could create an entire blog based on just one of the topics that I've covered on the blog. There's over 3,700 articles there. And with this ongoing questioning of why it seems that Black Brazilians seem to choose white partners or prefer white partners, it's, more and more people are questioning this. Now you have a Black psychologist talking about it. Famous Black psychologist, I think her name was Neuza Santos. She was cited in this article. She talked about this way back in 1983 in her book, Tornar-se Negro, which means becoming Black, and just the problems Black people go through psychologically in Brazil because of this overarching belief in white superiority, or, how it affects the Black community. It's like it destroys the community from the inside. So, okay, so I'm going to end the video here. Like I said, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about this topic that came up here. There's others who are talking about it. Like when this separation happened, it was just like the talk of the Black media in Brazil. So curious what your thoughts are. Drop a comment, consider subscribing to the channel. Give me a thumbs up if you like this. I would like people to suggest some topics they'd like for me to cover. If you have any ideas, I'll definitely take a look at them. Smash that notification button so you'll be one of the first people to get my videos when they first debut. And with that said, I'm going to end the video here and look forward to my next video and seeing you guys there.